Good morning, everyone. I'm Ding Yang from China Global Television Network, and I'm Beijing, the State Guest House, Diaoyu Tai. And today is the China Development Forum, and today's subject is about economy and China's fiscal policy. And I'm honored to introduce you a distinguished guest and also the key speaker for the event today, Mr. Michael Spencer, the Nobel laureate. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I will be quick. I know that you have given a speech in a few minutes. I read an article you wrote about China's debt problem, and you said that China's debt problem is not just a debt problem. What do you mean by that?
I mean that there's nothing wrong with issuing debt to finance investment, provided it's an investment with a high return. The problem, the real reform problem, is what I meant, and I think most people agree with this, is to reform the system so that it does a better job of screening out low return investment.
Do you think because China is planning to cut tax, which means they're going to increase the deficit, the budget deficit, do you think that's a sound method to achieve that end?
It depends on how long it lasts, right? So, there's headwinds in the global economy. There's been a bit of a shock. It's perfectly legitimate to use fiscal means to buffer the economy from the shock. And I think these tax cuts are designed to help parts of the private sector, particularly the manufacturing side, that's been hit fairly hard, make it through. So, you have to know the enormous amount of detail and know whether they got it exactly right. But the idea is not crazy at all.
And another problem with the Chinese economy is attempt to create more jobs. About around 10 million new jobs in 2019. And I know lots of your works actually in the field of job seeking for job seekers. And do you have any advice for Chinese policymakers on that regard?
No, I think they're doing the right thing. I mean, again, you'll have ups and downs. But this major challenge that we face in everywhere where digital technology is coming is they're taking parts of jobs out of the economy. I mean, you can see it everywhere. And so that challenge is something that China, like everybody else, is going to have to deal with. It's really shifting skills and human capital.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Spencer. Wow, it's really, what is something I didn't expect to actually, because you can looking around. We are in the Diaoyu Tai State Guest House, where the China Development Forum is ongoing, and in Beijing, and so many men in suits, and I think that suggests the seriousness of this event. It is a platform like the frame, like that board we just show you. This is a platform where experts, practitioners of the market, and the government officials informing each other. And for the next event, which is about to kick-started in about 3 minutes, the Chinese Minister of Finance will give a keynote speech, and also another speech will be given by the expert I just interviewed, Mr. Michael Spencer, who is a Nobel Economic Laureate. And the event is going to be about China's fiscal policy, and then asking Mr. Spencer a few questions. And hopefully, if you stay tuned into this event, you can take those questions and the answers from Mr. Spencer into the meeting. And after the meeting, we'll be live streaming the whole event. And after the panelist discussion, we will come back to this very spot, trying to interview more experts and participants of this forum, of this discussion, and to see, because over the past years, the Chinese economy has been facing downward pressure, both because of the structural reform at home, and, like Mr. Spencer just said, the downward pressure and the slow demand in the global market, and not to mention the trade talks between China and the US. And so, facing these difficulties and the challenges, what would Chinese government do? Chinese Premier Li Keqiang already said in his government report that in 2019, China will cut tax. to unleash more energy for growth momentum. Will that work, and how will that work? And I believe that is a key issue going to be raised up and talked over during today's event in about 1 minute. And apart from that, because China is going to create more jobs, and that certainly will demand a budget created for this to this end. So that is also something worth looking at, because job is a fundamental thing. And apart from this, we will also be looking for some response from the market pressures, i.e. the business people, because they're everywhere here, you can see. They're from companies, the company owners and the big CEOs from across the world. They're also looking forward to this panelist discussion, because they want to know what the tax cut will, how will the tax cut in fact and benefit their business in China, and also the Chinese business people, especially the small and the medium-sized business, they are poised to be the biggest beneficiaries of this new policy of a tax cut. So how would they react to this policy? It is also very interesting and also very important, because they contribute a huge share to China's economy and China's growth. And I think that the discussion is about to take place. We will live stream the event, and also you can leave your comments about the Chinese economy on the comment section of CGTN's digital platform, and I will collect your problems, your questions, and I will try to seek the answers for you, and I will come back in about an hour to try my best to answer those questions of yours. And stay tuned to CGTN. The discussion is about to happen. I'll see you soon.
Shortly time. So for this session, we will focus on China's new fiscal policies, proactive ones in 2019.
各位来宾、女士们、先生们，大会第3单元马上就要开始了，请各位来宾移步千人厅，并尽快落座，谢谢。
Session 3 will commence shortly. Please come into the Grand Hall and find your seat.
The Grand Hall and find your seat. Thank you.
For this year's China Development Forum, it has a theme of greater opening up for win-win cooperation. And for this session, we focus on new measures and the proactive fiscal policy.
各位来宾、女士们、先生们，我们大会第3单元马上就要开始了，请各位尽快移步千人厅，并尽快落座，谢谢。Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, session 3 will commence shortly. Please now enter the grand hall and find your seat. Thank you. 女士们、先生们，下面我们马上开始今天大会的第3单元，主题为积极财政。
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now commencing session 3. The theme is new measures and proactive policy.
首先，让我们掌声有请第3单元主持人、国务院发展研究中心副主任张来明。
First of all, let's welcome the chair for this session, Vice President of State Council Development Research Center, Mr. Zhang Laiming. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Now we are commencing the third session of this forum for today. The theme is new measures and proactive fiscal policy. As we all know that fiscal policy takes up an important position in the economic policy of a nation as well as economic operation in a nation. Since 2009, we have considered domestic and international economic situation, and China has adopted proactive fiscal policy for 11 consecutive years. For last December, we had the National Central Economic Work Conference, which has mentioned that we need to undertake the proactive fiscal policy with higher intensity and with better performance. And in the work report of the government, Premier Li Keqiang has mentioned that we need to also take measures for proactive fiscal policy. And for 2019, China will take a lot of measures in terms of tax and fee cuts. What are the measures specifically? And how can we adjust the scale and structure of fiscal expenditure? And while taking proactive fiscal policy, how can we actually increase and improve the efficiency of fund allocation, and how can we fend off the debt risks? I think that these issues may be your concern. We are very delighted to have invited authority on this aspect to discuss the topic. One is Minister of Finance, Mr. Liu Kun, and the other, Professor Michael Spence of New York University, the 2001 Nobel laureate in economics. And now let's first welcome Minister Liu Kun to give a speech.
各位来宾、女士们、先生们，很高兴参加这次论坛，就和大家
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to participate into this forum and to discuss proactive fiscal policy as well as our economic policy.
他是诺奖获得者。
And later on, Mr. Spence will also give a speech. And he is a Nobel Prize laureate, so I will try to speak as fast as possible to save time for his sharing. And fiscal policy is a major way of macro regulation. It covers economy, society, culture, as well as eco-civilization. And it is important for the stable and balanced development of the economy and society. It is also important to the market economy operation. It is also meaningful to enhancing the governance of this nation. Since the 18th National Congress of CPC, The center leadership of CPC, with President Xi Jinping as a core, has seized on the current positioning, and we have made the judgment that we have entered into a new normal of economic development. And for this new normal, we focus on Xi Jinping's thoughts on the socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. And we focus on stability while maintaining progress. And we have led China's economy for stable and sustained development. For the last 6 years, in the face of complex domestic and international situations, we have maintained the consistency and stability of macroeconomic policy. We refrain from taking blanket stimulus measures, and we focus on targeted regulation. We take well-timed and proper adjustment. We focus on targeted regulation to keep the economy within a proper range. We promote reform, we benefit the people, and we fend off risks. We have achieved success in these respects. And to enhance macro regulation, proactive fiscal policy has played an important role. And we have rolled out the VAT reform, and we have general beneficial tax cuts. We enhance tax and fee cuts, and we have reduced the burden on the real economy, and we offer fiscal support for the national strategies. We also support major reforms and major policies so that we can expand effective demand, we can innovate in the ways of fiscal expenditure. We promote the cooperation between government and private funds. We want to guide private investment. With proactive fiscal policy and other policies, we have a synergy, and China's economy has contributed to 30% of the world economic growth. Domestic demand has played a larger role in supporting growth. Services and consumption has contributed a larger share. We have stable situation in terms of jobs and prices, and we have achieved and contributed to the sense of achievement of the people. And China's economy has transformed from high-speed growth to high-quality growth. And we are in an important juncture for upgrading the growth model, and we are upgrading the structure of the economy. And the fiscal part is an important foundation for national governance. We need to focus on Xi Jinping's thoughts, and we need to stick to the new concept of development. We focus on structural reform so that we can continue to promote high-quality growth. We enhance the fiscal and tax mechanisms so that we can help China's economy to achieve high quality and high efficiency growth, which is also sustainable. And this year is the 70th birthday of the PRC. And this year is also an important juncture to build a moderately prosperous society in all respects. And this is also an important year for us to achieve the first centennial. And in accordance with the government work report, today the proactive fiscal policy needs to contribute to the real economy. We need to invigorate the economy, and we need to benefit the people. And we keep this proactive fiscal policy, and this decision is made in line with the rational consideration of both domestic and international situation. We have a full grasp of the whole situation of reform and stability as well as development. And this decision is also focusing on the counter-cyclical adjustment of the macro policy, and we need to tackle the downward pressure. For the proactive fiscal policy, we want to have better intensity and performance. It is to give better play to the fiscal policies and to contribute to the upgrading of the economy. And to have larger scale tax and fee cuts, we need to focus on the real economy. And real economy is the foundation of a national economy. It is the generator of the wealth. And real economy is the foundation for national competitiveness. And to support real economy, we need to focus on slowing the growth of government revenue, and we need to invigorate the government profits, and we can multiply the market vitality. And for this year, we will have larger-scale tax and fee cuts. And this will reduce the burden on enterprises and will reduce the social security contribution. The scale is nearly 2 trillion yuan. And this kind of policy will be stronger and of larger scale than last year. We will have tax and fee cuts, we have VAT reform. The current rate of 16% and 10% will be reduced to 13% and 9% respectively. And we need to ensure that the tax burden of major industries to remain reduced. And we keep the lowest bracket of 6%. But through deduction and supporting measures, we ensure that all sectors will see the tax and fees reduced. And we also streamline the tax system. At the same time, for this January, we have adopted a measure to have preferential tax relief that is general beneficial to small and micro-sized enterprises. We have 17 million and more enterprises benefiting from this policy, accounting for 95% of all the tax-paying enterprises, and 98% of them are private ones. We want to raise the threshold for the tax of the small and micro-sized enterprises with low profits. We expand the tax relief coverage, and we want to streamline the tax payment system, which will become more convenient. We also focus on personal income tax. We will increase the threshold, and we have 6 deduction policies so that we can reduce the burden for the working class and we can invigorate the consumption. And for tax and fee cuts, we will adjust downward the contribution of basic pension fund, and for different localities, the downward adjustment can reach to 16%. We will reduce the contribution of employment insurance as well as the workplace insurance so that we focus on targeted measures and universal beneficial measures. We want to have accumulative measures, and we can invigorate the market vitality. And this is also for us to improve the tax system and to improve the income distribution system. And this is also for us to safeguard growth and stability, as well as invigorate the job market. And we will take related measures to implement the tax and fee cuts so that market entities, especially small and micro enterprises, will feel their tax burden reduced substantially. We will do this policy well. And we will support the supply-side structural reform, and we will promote the high-quality growth of the economy. By deepening supply-side reform, this is an important measure for us to change the economic model. And this is also for us to improve the quality of the supply side, and it is a necessary path to high-quality growth. Proactive fiscal policy will expand domestic demand, and we will stick to the priorities of the supply-side structural reform. We will take reform as a means, and we will resort to market-oriented and goal-based measures. While enhancing the current achievements, we will focus on connectivity and smooth operation, and we will consolidate the achievements in reducing the excess capacity, excess leverage, and we will help with the innovation of industries with excess capacity. We will reduce excess capacity, and we will help with the restructuring of enterprises. We will facilitate the enterprises to phase out backward capacity, and we will invigorate the market. We have more investment in basic research. We will have support for the public technology and scientific research, and we will tackle the issue of lacking basic innovative power. We will focus on the transformation of scientific research. We will upgrade the industries so that we can have a better development of the manufacturing sector. We will give full play to fiscal policy to direct assets, capital resources to concentrate in key industry sectors so that we can have a smoother operation and circulation of the national economy. We will use tax subsidies and deductions to have better support for private enterprises and small and micro enterprises. We will give full play to the inclusive finance designated funds. We will support small and micro enterprises, and we will facilitate the financing of the agricultural-related enterprises. We will expand fiscal support, and we will form a strong domestic market. Faced with downward pressure, these tax and fee cuts will lead to the slowing down of the growth for fiscal revenue, and fiscal expenditure will be inelastic. We face a higher pressure of fiscal deficit. We will calculate this kind of deficit, and we will use different funds, and we will reduce the general expenditure at the central and local government level. And for this year's fiscal budget, the expenditure will be higher than 23 trillion yuan, up 6.5%. And the transfer payments will increase by 10.9% to equalize basic public services. And the deficit will be 2.76 trillion yuan, and the deficit will increase from 2.6% to 2.8%. And we have special bonds in the amount of 2.15 trillion yuan. And for the balance problem, we will have a bottom-line approach. We need to secure the investment in key areas and reduce unnecessary expenditure. We will use the funds effectively and in a targeted manner so that we can better support the industries and tasks that will benefit the national economy. We will have the performance-based management for budgets. We will be careful in the use of even 1 penny so that we can implement the policies in a more effective manner. To face the downward pressure, proactive fiscal policy will focus on boosting consumption and stabilizing investment. We will also release the potential of domestic demand, and we will increase the investment in infrastructure, and we will upgrade the investment. We focus on the low-cost housing project, and we will invigorate the consumption to a higher level. We will expand the investment in education, culture, healthcare, and senior care. We will support new energy vehicle, and we will expand the rural consumption so that we can nurture new growth point of consumption. We will accelerate the rate for local government bonds. And by September, we will issue about 3.08 trillion of bonds. And we will allocate funds more efficiently to invest in major projects. We will give full play to the fiscal policy in stabilizing investment and expanding domestic demand. We will have the fiscal part to support 3 priority campaign of this country. We focus on poverty reduction, funding of financial risk, and reducing economic and ecological pollution. We will tackle the issue of the pain points for economic development and tackle the real difficulties. And proactive fiscal policy is also beneficial to build a moderately prosperous society in all respects. We will take a targeted measure to tackle the key priorities. By the end of 2018, the local government debt is about 18.39 trillion yuan, 77.6%, still lower than the international warning level, and we have controllable debt risk, and we will fend off local government debt risks, especially hidden debt risks, and we will curb the increment of hidden debt. And for unlawful and illegal fundraising, we will have a lifelong accountability and backward accountability. We will deal with the stock of hidden debts, and we will reduce the scale of hidden debts and reduce the risk level. The central government will increase the investment in poverty reduction campaign, and we each year have increased about 20 billion yuan. And for this year, we have the increase in this investment of 18.9%. The increment will focus on poor area, and other transfer payments and debt allocation will favor this kind of in-depth poverty region. And we need to focus on the support for the poor area and poor people. And we will have the support in terms of industrial upgrading, education, healthcare, and these ways can be used to reduce poverty. We will also focus on the pollution part, as well as safeguarding the blue sky. And the central government will invest more money to focus on the pollution of air as well as water. We will invest about 60 billion. And we'll tackle both the symptom and root causes. We'll focus on Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei province. We'll tackle the clean heating issue in northern cities, and we will restore the ecology in Yangtze River area, and we will also improve the quality of the ecology and environment in a continuous manner. We will improve people's livelihood according to our competence and capacity. And public finance come from the people, and we will support the people. For the fiscal policy, we will focus on our people, and we will make it more transparent and equitable so that the benefits of reform can better benefit the people. And for this year, although we face a large pressure in the fiscal balance, we will ensure that the investment in basic people's livelihood will increase instead of decrease. We will improve certain mechanisms and institutions so that we can ensure that we continue to improve people's livelihood. China is still the largest developing country in the world. Improving people's livelihood need to align with economic development. And we will try our best and consider our actual conditions. We will keep the bottom line and safeguard the basic livelihood. We will focus on jobs so that the graduates from high school, veteran soldiers, and the migrant workers will be our priority. We will focus on the people who have difficulties in finding a job. We will have 53.9 billion yuan in terms of supporting the unemployment insurance and other policies. We will facilitate employment and starting ups. We will focus on education, healthcare, social security, and other issues of people's concern. We will support a more equitable, a higher quality transaction market so that we can contribute to the basic healthcare and major disease insurance. We will facilitate the establishment of a multi-layer pension system, so we continue to increase the subsistence level of the urban and rural area. And while securing people's livelihood, we will tackle the excessively high promise for people's livelihood. We will establish standards and we will have more regulation so that we can curb these kind of policies and promises which is not in line with the current condition, so that our investment in improving people's livelihood will be more efficient, more practical, and more feasible on the current condition. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, China's socialism has entered into a new era. Standing on a new point, we will adhere to the new concept of development, focusing on the supply-side structural reform. We will focus on the high-quality growth and continuous innovation. We will fine-tune the macro regulation. We focus on stabilize the growth. We will fend off the risk, and we will keep the economic range. And we will stabilize the jobs, financial sector, foreign trade, and foreign investment. We also want to stabilize investment and exportation. We will invigorate the market confidence. We will contribute to people's sense of belongings and achievements. We will continue to deepen the reform. We will expand opening up to the world so that we can contribute to the healthy and sound growth of the economy and society, so that we can contribute and lay a foundation for the effort to build a moderately prosperous society in all respects, so that we can contribute to the 70th anniversary of this nation and contribute to the world economy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Minister Liu, for your speech. Now let's welcome Professor Michael Spence for the speech. Let's welcome.
Minister Liu, Minister Zhang, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be back here. I've said several times on this visit something I believe deeply, which is that I almost always learn way more than any small imaginable amount that I contribute on the way through here, but it's extremely rewarding. I think you just heard an extraordinarily comprehensive and sensible account of the approach to fiscal policy broadly here, and I'm not going to do anything other than reinforce some of that. But what I'd like to talk about is fiscal policy and some drift, if I could put it that way, when you look around the world in this area. As I think you know, fiscal policy has several different purposes. One is providing government services and employment. That's a fairly standard one. The second one is redistribution. Some of it, incident specific, like unemployment insurance, protecting people when transitions knock them out of the labor market and they need retraining and so on. And some of them redistribution through the social insurance scheme, but the heading is redistribution, right? Leaning against forces that loose in the world that we don't want to let loose without countermeasures. And the third one is investment, or in some cases as a co-investor, and that's a very different agenda. That's part of supporting the long-run growth and development agenda of the country. And in that second capacity, governments issue debt. And it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do when you're creating long-term assets, to issue debt so that you distribute the burden of paying for them over time and over generations and over the life of the assets. Now, when you look at the function, this is an extraordinarily complicated world. When you look at the functions, I think of them these ways. One is counter-cyclicality, leaning against, buffering from shocks. The second one is the redistributive one, countering market pressures. And the third one is the long-term growth agenda. When I look at the world in the post-crisis period, 2008 onward, you might have thought it was delevering. But numerous attempts to study this suggest that it's doing the exact opposite. And it may not be terribly surprising. I don't want to leave you with the impression governments are the only guilty parties in this process, but we have lived for a very prolonged period with abnormally low interest rates. And I think it seems at least reasonable to guess that, with a little bit of amnesia, people think, well, maybe this is a permanent condition, There's I don't know monetary policy, but there's a lot of talk about R-star having dropped permanently. Maybe we can just do this, and sustainable debt levels have changed. But I don't believe it, and I think there are risks. So what I'd like to talk about is the things that I see that, for the most part, China is not doing that look problematic to me. The first one is what I call non-debt liabilities. These are obligations that governments take on in areas like pensions, in the case of the United States, healthcare. And there's several things to say about them. One, they're huge, absolutely huge, even compared to relatively high levels of sovereign debt as ratios to GDP. These numbers are very, very big. my general impression is that people look at it, look horrified, and then somehow the political system moves on and we don't do much about it. And I'm not sure why that's true. I think it may be because in some cases it's out in the future. When you look more closely at this, you discover that countries are very different in the maturity structure of these non-debt liabilities, right? So I live in Italy. We have a demographic aging problem like most other people, but ours is pretty imminent. The way the pension systems were constructed, it means it's coming at us right now. If you look at the United States, it's coming at us, but it's coming at us further out. And so I think what I've seen is that it's very difficult in many political systems to actually move on these issues at the time you need to move. The good news is that you can tinker with these systems in the early, if you do it far enough in advance, and rebalance the system. But what seems to happen is we wait until it's urgent, and then you run out of options. You basically canceling promises you made to people or something like that. In other words, when you wait too long, it's too late. There's been some talk of tinkering with demographics in order to solve this problem. Places that don't have many immigrants think maybe they should have more. That doesn't sound like fiscal policy. I don't think that's a crazy idea, but to be honest with you, it's a fairly blunt instrument for dealing with this. So the first thing I want to leave you with is that on a fairly broad scale, we've run up a fair amount of debt, and we have big non-debt liabilities in most places, unfunded, for not completely, but to a great extent, and so on. The second area is investment, or what I've put on my piece of paper here, underinvestment. Now let me state this clearly. This is not a problem in China. Public sector investment has been, the problem in China and the target of the reforms is to make the investment process efficient. And that specifically means avoidance of making investments that have low returns or values that are less than the debt that's used to create the asset. But nobody would accuse China of underinvestment. But there's a lot of other places in the world with the pressures that surround these various functions of fiscal policy where underinvestment is a fairly significant problem. And at the risk of telling you things that everybody in the room knows, public sector investment is A, directly beneficial to people, but B, it's a crucial part of the successful growth strategy. And the reason for that is because it's complementary to private sector investment. That is, it creates tangible and intangible assets that increase the opportunities to invest in the returns on private sector investment. And so a deficiency in that area is a problem from the point of view of growth, productivity, et cetera. Now, why do we underinvest? This is something that's puzzled me. My general impression is that the balancing act you just heard about in the case of the Chinese program is very well balanced in the sense there's an investment program, there's a program to deal with some fairly severe distress in the private sector in terms of liquidity and ability to stay afloat, and so on. But I don't see that everywhere. And so the question is, why do we underinvest? And I think part of the answer is that it's not well understood how important private sector investment is in an overall growth strategy. At least that's an impression I've gotten from touring around the world and being in lots of different places. The third issue I wanted to highlight, and I'm going to run out of time, is debt. Just plain debt. We've had an extended period of low interest rates, and I think we have therefore facilitated a run-up of debt globally. Not all of it on the sovereign debt side, but to some extent. And we've developed a kind of complacency over this. In addition, we've lived not only in a low interest rate environment, but we've lived in a low growth, low inflation environment in the developed countries. And so the debt overhangs that we have created a vulnerability if there's a regime change in terms of interest rates and so on. But we also are living in a world where the normal method for reducing debt overhangs over time, which is nominal growth, isn't going to work very fast. So I think we should be more concerned about this than we are. The final two comments are, by now I think everybody knows that the Phillips curve has disappeared. And for most of the period that I've been paying attention as an economist, there was a reasonably well-established relationship between unemployment and inflation, or at least wage inflation. And that seems to have vanished. Either the Phillips curve is marching to the left on the graph pretty fast, or it just isn't there anymore. And to be honest with you, I don't think we understand this. And that creates uncertainty. I mean, you know, if you think it's permanent, then that really does change the rules. It changes the rules of monetary policy, and it changes the rules on fiscal policy. The United States just had a pro-cyclical fiscal event, a big tax cut at unemployment rates we'd never seen before. If we tried that 15 or 20 years ago, it would have been viewed as something close to insanity. With an unemployment rate, you know, below 4%, but we got away with it. I mean, I'm not saying it was excellent policy, but this is a really different world, and I think we're having a little trouble navigating in it. The final thing, and I will stop, is prudent fiscal policy involves A, a balancing act, and B, a judgment about how aggressive you can be. And how aggressive you can be depends on growth. But it's complicated. I live in Italy, right? Our government has decided that we can be more aggressive on fiscal policy because we sort of have to jumpstart the economy. The problem is, and here's where the complexity comes from, the problem is there is nothing in the economic program, and forgive me for, you know, being a little critical of the place where I live and its government, there's nothing in the economic program that even vaguely resembles the rest of a credible growth strategy. And so a fiscal program that's aggressive in that context without the growth will continue to produce a larger and larger sovereign debt overhang. The sovereign debt to GDP ratio in Italy is 140%, second only to Japan. But I'm trying to be a little more nuanced about this, so let me just say it one more time. If a China or an India, which does and has historically got a credible growth program with all the other pieces in place, then going a bit out on a limb in order to get the public sector investment side done makes a good deal of sense. But it really does depend on the overall program, that is, really having a strategy. Thank you very much.
For your excellent speech. Now, we will enter into the Q&A session. So we want to see what are the questions posed online. The first question is addressed to Minister Liu. For this year, China's tax and fee cuts scale will be about 2 trillion yuan. It focuses on widely beneficial and will also focus on structural tax cuts. So what are the indicators or aspects we can analyze this issue? Thank you for your question. And thank you for your attention online. According to the work report of the government, for this year, we will reduce the tax burden for enterprises, and we will reduce the social security contribution, all in all, in the amount of 2 trillion yuan. And this is for proactive fiscal policy. And for this policy, we have the focus on tax cuts, about 70%. And for others, we focus on reducing social security contribution. We also focus on reducing other charges, as well as the charges on the operation of enterprises. We also will implement all the policies. And through general beneficial and structural approach, we will reduce the taxing fees for the manufacturing sector as well as small and micro enterprises, so that these enterprises may have more sense of achievement. First, we focus on small and micro enterprises. And for this round of policy measures, we have expanded the coverage of small enterprises with low profits. We have this kind of coverage in line with other ministries and departments' description. Small and micro enterprises are very dynamic these days, and we need to help them all together. We have 17.98 million enterprises, accounting for 95% of all the enterprises. 98 of them are private ones. And for small and micro enterprises, we reduce the tax and we focus on income tax. We have differentiated income tax rate based on the total taxable revenue. And for certain enterprises, the taxable revenue is less than 1 million, and the rate is 5%, 20 percentage points lower than the average level. And for the revenue less than 2 million, the rate is 10%. And we can say the tax structure may be complex, but we have the result of reducing the tax for small and enterprises. And we have also increased the exemption threshold. We will have a simple approach so that we can help these enterprises. And for local governments, they have also adopted certain makeup and matching policies. Within the 50% threshold, we will reduce the charges on the resources or the real estate or the use of land or the taken up of agricultural land. And we can reduce by the margin of 50%, and we can see that all the local governments have reduced by the exact margin. And for manufacturing sector, we have been released the plan to reduce VAT for manufacturing sector. After the release, we have a warm response. The reduction of VAT, according to the requirement, this kind of measure will come into force since the first day of April this year. There are two aspects. One, we focus on reducing the tax from 16% to 13% of manufacturing sector, for transportation and construction from 10% to 9%. And we have this lowest bracket of 6%. This remains the same. And we will have deduction, and we will have weighted deduction, so that the rates will continue to decrease instead of increase. Just now, Professor Spence has mentioned that fiscal measures are a process of wealth distribution. And in formulating this policy, we also take distribution and redistribution into account. In national income distribution for recent years, we can see that China's enterprises have taken up a decreasing share in income distribution. So we will take these following measures to benefit the manufacturing sector and construction sector. And for reducing fees and charges, from the 1st of May, we will reduce the contribution ratio for pension fund from 20% to 16%. And this kind of decrease is substantial. And we also need to wait for different localities to roll out their own respective specific measures. And we will also reduce the contribution of unemployment and workplace injury insurance. And we also focus on subsidies for stabilizing job positions and other aspects so that we can reduce the burden of fee contribution. And this will also benefit the public services. And with these measures, we can say we will get a positive effect. We will pay more effort to implement these policies. Thank you. Thank you, Minister Liu, for your excellent response. And we will see the second question. The second question is addressed to Professor Michael Spence. And the question is about, for recent years, President Trump has adopted a series of tax cuts in the U.S. In your opinion, how does the U.S. government balance tax cuts and the financial sustainability and financial capacity? So what are the experiences that we can learn?
Probably not. I don't want to be too critical, but I would say in the face of what some of us believe is a fairly difficult trend in terms of the distribution of income and wealth, a tax reform would have been an opportunity to address that while addressing some other things as well. And I think it's generally agreed that that particular tax cut at least didn't do that, and maybe moved us in the opposite direction. I don't want to be, make sweeping generalizations. There were some elements of that that were probably beneficial to business, and in conjunction with some aspects of deregulation, and it was well received. But I think the overall macroeconomic judgment of that was that we probably could have used a tax reform, but we probably at that moment, having had a fairly complete, lengthy recovery from the great financial crisis and very low unemployment, it wasn't the time to have a very large tax cut. And what you now see happening is the effect of that stimulus is wearing off and is reducing a predictable slowdown on the American side. And so it's not the whole story. So I think that what's going to happen in the United States, is completely unpredictable. My view is that the world slowdown is in part the cumulative effect of uncertainty coming from multiple quarters, that the trade war frictions between the United States and China that spill over to every other economy in the world. I don't think it's literally impossible to predict what will happen in the next American election, but the range is enormous. We could have another term of the current administration. We could have a center-right to center-left government. We could have a government that, by American standards, is considerably further to the left, with major changes in policy, including tax, health care, and other things, and we just don't know. But what I think is not going to work, to try to answer the question directly, I don't think the American society will hold together on the economic trends that we have now. It's just too unequal. So we have dropped the ball on the redistributive component of fiscal policy.
I might add, I mean, we're not doing stellarly in certain areas of investment, public sector investment either. You know, that's a mixed picture. So I won't go in.
Thank you, Professor, for your response. And next, the third question is addressed to Minister Liu Kun. So for this year, we have a challenge in terms of fiscal deficit. So what do you consider in terms of fiscal expenditure? How can we have a balanced fiscal year? Thank you for your question. Because we can say, as I have just mentioned, we have a 2 trillion scale of tax and fee cuts, and the figure has been released. We have triggered a long round of discussion. For such a scale of fee and tax cuts, how can we keep the budget balanced? It is really difficult. Because 2 trillion, this is such a large scale. And in terms of fiscal operation, it is unprecedented to have an annual reduction of such a large scale. So we can see that we have been contributing and working a lot in terms of reducing tax and fees. And this will add to the fiscal pressure. And to balance the budget, we need to focus on different aspects. And first, we will explore the revenue sources, and second, we will cut the expenditure. And for the source part, the revenue source, we will have a normal growth and sound growth. And on the other hand, we need to cut the expenditure. And as I have mentioned before, we will be very prudential and careful, and we will be very smart in calculating how we use the funds. So we will introduce about how we can keep the budgetary balance. From central government perspective, we have raised more than 1 trillion funds to balance the difficulty brought about by the fee and tax cuts. Professor Spence has mentioned about government investment in China. He has mentioned that China's investment has been balanced, and through government investment, China make up for other shortcomings, and this is not seen in other countries. And in China, we have other things that is not seen in other countries, because we have this systematic arrangement of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And this is the utmost safeguard and foundation for China's development. For instance, different local governments and the central government, we are also the sponsor and investor of certain enterprises. And as the investors, we can draw certain profits at this important juncture. We can collect more of the profits at specific years to tackle the shortcome and shortfall of funds. So for this year, the central government can increase the deficit to GDP ratio, and we can collect more from designated enterprises as well as the enterprises directly under the central government. And we have used 280 billion yuan of funds in the budget. And we can reduce expenditure. So we have raised in the amount of 200 billion yuan. So altogether, we have raised 1 trillion yuan to tackle the shortfall of funds. So the central government has maintained the transfer payments to local governments, and these transfer payments have increased instead of decreased. Last year, the transfer payments and tax refund has increased by 8.2%, and for this year, we project 9%. So while we reduce revenue, we also increase the transfer payments to local governments. And for the periodical transfer payments, the growth is 10.9%, double-digit growth. And for public services, we have also increased the investment. We have also helped local governments to tackle the fiscal pressure, and local governments have their space to make an effort. Local governments can coordinate all sources of funds and optimize the structure of funds. They can better invest. So local governments can also raise substantial funds. While reducing tax and fees in large scale, we are able to keep a budget balance, and we can achieve financial and fiscal sustainability. And at the same time, we will better use the fiscal fund to satisfy the demand of the society and the economy. We will also contribute to improving people's livelihood. In line with the 19th National Congress of the CPC, we will have a performance-based management of budget. We will increase and improve the efficiency of fund use so that the performance-based management will be implemented in all the process of drafting and implementing budgets. And we will have a regulation concerning the budgets, and we will rectify any deviation or any shortcomings so we can better implement the fiscal policy with better effects. So all in all, we will expand the sources of revenue, and central government and local governments have taken multiple measures. And we can expand the revenue source, and we will also cut the expenditure. For the inelastic investment we need to secure, for general expenditure, we will reduce by more than 5%. And for central government, we have reduced more than 10%. And when allocating funds, we will use the fund saved to serve a more targeted task. And through these kind of measures, we can achieve a budgetary balance. Thank you. Thank you, Minister Liu, for your answer. And we have a good control of time, and this is the end of this session. So let's again extend our gratitude to Mr. Liu Kun and to Professor Spence. Thank you for your speeches. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes session 3. 接下来是大会的午餐演讲环节，请各位来宾移步14号楼1层芳华厅。Ladies and gentlemen, the luncheon session will start at 12:20. Please now proceed to Fanhua Hall at the first floor of Villa 14. 请观察员前往14号楼3层用餐，请媒体记者和工作朋友。
The China Development Forum is underway, and if you just tune in, I can brief you that the panelist discussion about China's fiscal policy just over, and China's Minister of Finance gave a speech about China's future tax cut and how it benefits small business. Another special guest, I interviewed him prior to the event. Is Mr. Michael Spencer, who is a Nobel Prize winner in 2001. They talked about what a prudent fiscal policy looks like. And before the discussion took place, I made a few appointments with the participants of the discussion, and now I'm waiting for them to look out. Okay, now and see all the guests are stepping outside the meeting hall, and I'm trying to locate the guest that I made an appointment with, talking about the Chinese economy and its outlook in 2019. We all know that Chinese economy now is feeling pressure, domestic and global alike. At home, the fruits of long-term structural reform are not big enough to make up for the lots of growth momentum, typical of the bottom of an economic cycle. And the trade talks between China and the US, before it yields any result, will continue to dog global economy. You know, sometimes in an occasion like that, when you're waiting for someone to come over to talk to you about big issues, big as the economy, is really hard because they're all wearing suits and they happen to be all black suits. So I guess it just depends on my luck a little bit. And another issue is a lot of the participants of this event, actually the owners or the CEOs of the big publicly listed companies, which means you cannot just come over and ask them to answer a few questions to you, because potentially what they say will bear influence on the performance of their stocks. And that's why they intend to be very prudent in a occasion like that with the media. And I can give you a few details about an event like this. And sometimes, well, the speech given by a minister or a high-ranking official is very important. But in addition to that, a forum like this is for people to inform each other, people from different backgrounds, so they can talk to each other, so that they can bring up their concerns about, say, the business environment in China, and officials from the Chinese government can take those advices or details back and emerge and to take into consideration their opinions, making Chinese policies. And that's the point of this forum. But besides that, because the meeting normally, one of this, the panelist discussion like that normally will last for an hour and then some time for the Q&A session. But after that, oh, I'm gonna take over. Mr. Wolf.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I know you're very busy.
I'm very sorry. My fault.
Just allow me to introduce my guest today, Mr. Martin Wolf, is Chief Economic Commentator for Financial Times. A few questions, very quick questions. What's your takeaway from today's discussion?
Television. Well, it's been an attempt by the Chinese government to say everything is normal, everything is under control, that they have active policies to keep the economy going. There's been very little expression of concern about the world economy, not much, or the trade negotiations. The whole context is to give the sense that everything is on track. They have recognized the slowdown and they're responding to that, and the long-term program of reform, opening up, and all the rest of it is underway. China remains committed to globalization and opening. So I think it's a sort of, what I take out of it, apart from all the detail, which is obviously useful, is that it's sort of business as usual. Things are going on as usual.
Do you think the tax cut is the best policy tools at this moment?
Yes, I think it probably is. I've been sort of recommending this. I mean, I don't think it's sensible to have a huge boost to private credit again. The debt levels are too high. I've always felt that the government can borrow more. That's natural. The government is creditworthy. You've got a slowdown problem, and it makes sense, therefore, to cut taxes. I think there are, however, some quite deep structural problems in keeping growth going in China, in the demand of the economy, so that probably won't work forever, but I think it makes sense to cut taxes in this situation.
Please allow me to go into details, because a lot of Chinese medium-sized and small-sized companies have been complaining that they have very, very hard time to get loans from, say, government, state lenders. And if a tax cut is meant to benefit most of these companies, the small companies, so do you think how should they get to balance this? How should they make sure that the companies the most in need could benefit from this tax cut?
Well, my understanding is a big part of the tax cut is a cut in VAT.
Yeah.
So that should presumably stimulate consumption and spending. So that should benefit a large number of companies through the demand side. I think there's a really big question about how the whole credit system in China works. I think historically it has been the case that credit has not gone so much to private business and particularly smaller business, and it's gone much more to the state enterprises and of course local government. And the reason is, of course, for the banks, that looks safer.
Yes.
Because they know they're going to be saved. And so lending to the private sector is much riskier. Now, the question is, can you set up institutions or encourage the creation of institutions which are sufficiently well capitalized to take the risk of lending to the private sector? That seems to me a big structural reform agenda. How do you create a credit system which, instead of expanding lending essentially within the broadly defined state system, actually really goes to the private sector? Now, that's a huge structural reform. A lot of people, I'm not an expert on this, a lot of people complain that this hasn't happened, but I think that's a very, very high priority for China, because all the impression I'm getting is, in the past, too much of the credit flow has not gone to the private sector. But in the short run, they can't fix that. So in the short run, it makes sense to cut taxes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr.
Pleasure.
Thank you. I think I don't need to say no more on the subject. I think they do. Thank you. Mr. Wolford is the chief commentator for Financial Times, a British newspaper, and the CGTN actually has been talking to him multiple times about the economy and about the about the current affairs. And yeah, I think what Mr. Wolford said just summed up my curiosities about today's event, about the Chinese fiscal policy and how the tax cut are going to benefit small-sized and medium-sized companies. And in order for that to eventually work, of course, the whole thing doesn't stop at what ministers just said. A lot of details need to be ironed out. A lot of infrastructure, financial infrastructure, need to be paved the way, because we all know that ever since China started its battle against piling debt and the financial risk, shadow banking in the sector actually has been reined in by the government. And we all know that the shadow banking system is the place where the small business always get their loans from, because still this has been recognized by the government that for small business to get loan from state lenders is still difficult, because, like Mr. Wolf just said, that the lenders, they still know that the risk of lending to small business is still higher than lending to big SOEs, that's state-owned enterprises. So how to make sure the loan will go to the targeted receivers is, I think, it's one of the challenges, and how the tax cut will offset the impact of shining the shadow banking sector will also be another thing that the CGTN will pay a close attention to. And I think with that, I can conclude today's live stream of the speech given by China's Minister of Finance and Michael Spence, the Nobel Economic Laureate. But a lot of questions haven't been unanswered, and for the China Development Forum is going to last for another day into tomorrow, and for all those questions we haven't found the answers to today, we will try to get the bottom of it within the time frame of the forum. But no worries if you haven't got the answer to your questions, because we will continue to pay attention to all the affairs in relation to Chinese economy in the future, and because now we have a very strong existence on social media platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on microblog. And if you have any problems in relation to China's economy and its future growth, feel free to leave your comments and questions on those platforms, and we'll pick them up, and we will collect them and send them to the experts and to the officials, and at the end of the day, we will bring the answers to you as soon as possible. Thank you for your time. I'm Din Yang in Beijing. See you next time.